Here we go again. It's the Overrated Experience Sports and Sports Betting Podcast, Episode 34, Season 2. I'm your host, Kyle Blond, and we have a jammed-packed show here for you on a late Thursday night. I'm hoping you're buckled up, ready to go, maybe crack a beer here. This is going to be a good one. We're going to be talking NFL props, as I promise you, each week on this around this timeline. We're also going to dabble on the College Football National Championship on Monday between the Michigan Wolverines and the Washington Huskies, which is actually an intriguing matchup, a fresh matchup when it comes to college football and the National Championship. And we're going to talk about I was going to talk about a few sports stories, but I really one from the NHL and one that came out of an incident between the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild, and in a segment on Sportsnet that has got a lot of action on Twitter, where I have a few thoughts, many thoughts, not just one straight thought on one position, but many thoughts on a layered issue that I believe is worth talking about and very interesting to talk about, and we'll get to that. So if you haven't joined the sports podcast known as the Overrated Experience Sports and Sports Betting Podcast, well, you're in for a treat here today. And what we talk about is sports betting. Right now, in this time of year, is predominantly NFL. So a lot of the focus is NFL. And you're going, like I said, we're going to touch base on the NCAA Football Championship. So we spread out to other sports. And as the NFL winds down, we'll start branching out to different sports, especially NBA, NHL, maybe college basketball, maybe dabble in some tennis, maybe tennis. The Australian Open's coming up. I'm going to check if I have time to really think about really bringing something on to the podcast for that. Also, UFC events going on, golf majors, a lot of stuff going on as we turn the clock over to 2024. And for those who have joined us before, thank you. Thank you for the support. Keep on spreading the word. Join us on Twitter, aka X, at Overrated EXPER2. That's Overrated EXPER2. You can find the link in the episode details from your podcast provider. And also on Instagram and Facebook at Overrated Experience. All right, so we're going to kick it off here, and I'm going to kick it off with a non-football story. So very interesting to me, and since it's predominantly my podcast, I can bring in the topics I think I want to talk about. And I want to talk about an incident that happened at a game, or at least let's say an incident that had layers of days that led up to the conversation I'm going to play for you and review and give you my thoughts. So the Minnesota Wild of the NHL, the National Hockey League, had a game against the Winnipeg Jets, the first of a home-and-home series, December 30th, and the Winnipeg Jets beat the Minnesota Wild were visiting Winnipeg on the first of a home-and-home series with the Jets and Wild. Sorry, I'm mixing that up. And the Wild lost 4-2 in Winnipeg. But the story coming out of the first matchup was that Kirill Kaprizov, which is one of the top forwards in the NHL, most entertaining forwards in the NHL for the Minnesota Wild, and their best player. He leads their team in points, and hands down, the most talented player that the Minnesota Wild have. The Minnesota Wild have gone through a coaching change this year. They're going to be battling for the playoffs. So they need all hands on deck, and they can't afford to lose a player of Kaprizov's ability and impact to their team. And during this game, Jets defenseman Brandon Dillon was in the corner with Kaprizov and began to cross-check. When I say cross-check, because he was doing it multiple times, until he hit that third cross-check where Kirill Kaprizov had to leave the game. Now, the idea or the thought was that Brandon Dillon's cross-checks were not in error or by mistake, and it wasn't that he didn't know who it was. So the Minnesota Wild, most likely correct, but the theory is that Kirill Kaprizov was targeted, and the attempt by Brandon Dillon was to injure Kirill Kaprizov. All right? So that's what happened in game one of the home and home. So Kaprizov has left the game. He is now questionable to when he's going to return to the lineup. A real blow for the Minnesota Wild. And from their perspective, the guy they sell jerseys for, the fans come to the rink and they buy jerseys. Their number one player that's going to be a make or break difference in the end result of the Minnesota Wild season. So you can imagine the anger and frustration in that locker room, coaching staff, fan base, to see that their top forward is now out and we don't know when he's going to return. He could return next week. He could return 3 months from now. But we don't know when he's going to return. So now, fast forward 24 hours later, December 31st, without Kaprizov, Minnesota Wild play at home and host the Winnipeg Jets. Right off the bat, fight. I can't even recall if the two guys got in a fight, kind of the answer for Kaprizov. They dropped the glove. So you think it might have been done there. But no. Minnesota Wild obviously are not happy that they allowed their best player to be vulnerable, and they weren't going to take it, and they were going to make a mark in this game, not just by the fight that opened the game. So the rest of the story was that Cole Perfetti, the youngish Jets forward, is in the face-off circle. He actually came in after, can't remember who was kicked out of the face-off for the Jets. He's facing off against Ryan Hartman. And if you see the footage of Ryan Hartman and Cole Perfetti's face-off, as soon as that puck drops, Ryan Hartman of the Minnesota Wild slashes. So basically, if you're aware of what happens in a face-off in the NHL, the two guys lean over, the linesman's going to drop the puck. Once the puck hits the ice, they basically try to take control with their sticks and keep possession. So Cole Perfetti, again, who had nothing to do with the cross-checking to Kaprizov, took basically a two-handed swipe from a stick to the jaw. It looks very dangerous. It's very harsh. Let's just say that it was pretty violent. It was vicious. And the funny thing here is, if you can add funny to this, is Cole Perfetti was mic'd up during this game, and Cole Perfetti after the game openly talked about saying, "Hey, I got high sticked," and Ryan Hartman told him afterwards that it was on purpose and he had to do it for the whole Kaprizov thing. And it was caught on tape. It was caught on mic. So the NHL did not penalize Hartman, the referees and the officials did not penalize Hartman during the game itself, but the player safety whatevers in the NHL fined Hartman $4,000 for the incident. Cannot use the mic'd up information to look at motivation. So even though it's been played and it's been heard, it's been shared, it cannot be used as evidence into the factoring in on what disciplinary action would take place. Because Ryan Hartman's a repeat offender. He's been suspended before. So obviously if it was admissible, most likely that would have been a harsher penalty and resulted in a multiple game suspension. So we fast forward to Sportsnet's coverage the other night, might have been last night, I guess, and they had a segment called The Dressing Room. So they have a few folks around the table, and one of the two participants in this interaction, or the main ones, are Jennifer Botterill, who is one of the analysts on Sportsnet. She's got a hell of a resume, multiple Olympic gold medalist for Team Canada. Really one of the big names in the evolution of women's hockey that's now led, she's part of this history, the Professional Women's Hockey League that just launched, to hopefully ongoing success. There's nothing wrong with having an alternative league to see grow and, kind of start out and expand in the world of hockey. So good luck there. Jamal Mayers, who is another analyst for Sportsnet, and he has a 13-year NHL career, mostly as a guy mixing it up, the rough stuff. But he has a 13-year NHL career, including a run with the Blackhawks, the Chicago Blackhawks, winning a Stanley Cup. Sam Cosentino, who's usually Sportsnet's one other analyst, a lot of junior hockey analytics in this conversation, and Carolyn Cameron, who is the host of the segment. So you got the four folks around the table, and this incident pops up. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play and stop as the conversation goes on and discuss my thoughts on this, because this got attention. Actually, before I do, my first comment is about overall Sportsnet. Now, Sportsnet years ago took over the Hockey Night in Canada, which is a big brand like Monday Night Football, or, I'm trying to think of another. It's just a huge brand in the NHL, but predominantly Canada, where Saturday night is known. You tune in, watch the NHL, you watch the Leafs, you watch the Canadians. It's a few years back, they went to doubleheaders, so you got a 7 o'clock game Eastern time, a 10 p.m. game. You used to have Coach's Corner with Don Cherry. You used to have Ron McLean, who is still there. You had, many things that a lot of long-term NHL fans in Canada have grown up watching Hockey Night in Canada. The Hockey Night in Canada property was bought over by Rogers and Sportsnet, and they kept Hockey Night in Canada, but have expanded it to, not just be on CBC, which is the, Canadian Broadcast Corporation, but Sportsnet and City TV, and, a lot more coverage and a lot more games. So my feedback on their contract with the NHL, and it may have been 7-8 years, maybe 10 years by now. I can't recall how long they've had it so far. And my initial thoughts here, and my initial thoughts have been for a long time, is that they from the get-go have taken a safe approach to the coverage of the game, really appealing or attempting to appeal for those who have already tuned in and are diehard hockey fans, aging diehard hockey fans. And the first example was when they first took over, Ron McLean, who was the face of Hockey Night in Canada, was shifted over to a new segment called, and I could get this wrong, Rogers Hotel Hockey, which predominantly was a Sunday night game where you basically host in a community and really get behind some of the stories out of the community while there was a Sunday night game on. And George Strompolopoulos, who came over from Those Who Remember Much Music, and also George Strompolopoulos has had a show on CNN. He's had several different things going on, a lot involving music, but absolutely fantastic when he sits down and interviews anybody from any walk of life, any industry, music, politics, everything you can, sports, whatever you can think of. And he was the new host kicking off the new relationship with Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada. And this relationship quickly fizzled out. And it fizzled out because, you know what? George Strompolopoulos is not Ron McLean. He's different, right? If the idea is take the show in a different evolutionary thought process to move the game and the show in a different direction, you stick with them and see how things handle over a long period of time. But whatever feedback Sportsnet got from the base, the 60, 70-year-old fans, whatever, whoever's phone call, like making a phone call or writing a letter, they got spooked and reverted back to Ron McLean as the host of Hockey Night in Canada. And George Strompolopoulos was out. So that's a red flag right off the bat, is that they looked at the property as already a successful property, not in terms of I'm going to invest this amount of money in this property and attempt to take it to different places and evolve it and grow it. So basically they bought a mutual fund or a bond where you have a locked-in timeline of investment and you're hoping that you get a small return, but it's safe. It's a safe investment. And as far as my opinion is concerned over their coverage over a long period of time, this is how they have conducted themselves covering the NHL. Excuse me. That very safe coverage. Now, they have some knowledgeable hockey insiders. Some folks there are pretty good. You know, I mean, if you're talking about hockey IQ, you know, insiders and, you know, folks that discuss the ins and outs of the game. But what they're lacking, and they have lacked up to this point, is anybody actually caring about the opinions of the folks on their network. Meaning, when something goes down in the NHL, or when something goes down in any other sport, you and I know that there are go-to people in the NFL, the NBA, you know, MLB, that you're looking to see what their reaction is. It may not be the most intelligent reaction when it comes to the breakdown of the X's and O's, but you're looking for an opinion that you're interested in hearing their take on something that's happened in the sport. Sportsnet, from their hockey coverage, lacks those personalities. So that's the initial stance. And what about the Play U stands out because this is a conversation from a positive standpoint, is brought my attention to the discussion, not about being angry on one side or another, but it was an interesting, different conversation that took place in this panel of two completely different thought processes on what I explained had occurred between the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild, and the actions taken, whether they be justified or not justified. And I want to play it, break it down, and look at it from both points of view and give my thoughts. And then also give my thoughts on the reactions from Twitter or the world around, which also are shocking to me. Okay? So I'm going to play it. I'm going to pause it as it's playing and give my comments as it's going on. So just to set you up, as a reminder, this is the panel talking about what I walked through. The response to Kaprizov being injured and Perfetti getting hit in the face violently, no question about it, and the discussion of what the thought process is around it. And the first voice you're going to hear is Jamal Maris, the longtime NHLer, with his thoughts from his perspective. Okay? And I'll stop as we go. Here we go.
To go at Perfetti. At the end of the day, to me, Hartman is sending a message that you're not going to go after our star player. And whether you like it or not, it becomes a question of how am I going to defend? And it's not about fighting. Some people would say, then Hartman should go fight him, right? I think he sent the right message. The fact that everybody knows that he said he was going to do it or not, I'm sorry. I know the game has changed, but there's still an element of fear. There's still an element of being aggressive and sending a message. These two teams could also meet in the playoffs. To me, sending a message is important. And whether you think it wasn't that egregious, that second cross-check to get him right in the right spot to Kaprizov from Dylan, to me, was just as vicious. Now, if no one knew, you know how many times centers make it accidentally on purpose? Leave a little extra knob on a face-off, kind of miss the puck, hit the guy in the cheek. The fact that we know that he meant to do it, that's the only part that I think reason why we're talking about it.
The end result.
So the first initial thought here, we're talking about Jamal Maris. He is a 13-year NHL veteran. So his perspective is from a fact that he has lived in these locker rooms, the culture of these locker rooms, right or wrong. He sees or has been through these events of, these incidents and follow-ups to these incidents and motivations and maybe the impact. If you do respond, not respond, your opposition's, reaction to you responding, and maybe I got to believe his insight there is talking about the results if they met in, let's say, the playoffs, like you talked about, and it could have an impact in your favor depending on how you react. But I do believe I give him credit for kind of getting out there and giving his personal opinion, because honestly, nobody, because it's not the safe opinion, would even bother expressing for the opportunity for somebody to debate and maybe even change his thought process depending on the response. So I'll give him kudos for that. But probably the forum on a 2-minute segment to kind of break out what he's thinking in a full perspective probably needs to be in a longer format and a longer discussion to kind of iron out his thoughts on what took place and why it was justified in his opinion based on his experience and what he's witnessed. I think that the segment's too short for a topic like this to be fully vetted. So that's my initial thought when I heard him open up the conversation of the dialogue. Sam Cosentino jumps in next. And honestly, I think he butchers the way he articulates what he's trying to get across. And I don't think if he looks back at what he's about to say, I think his intent was fine, and he believes his intent. But I think the word choice, he'd probably go back and say, I probably formulated how I said it, not the way I intended, and I probably would like a redo on this. But let's see what you think.
With Kaprizov as he's hurt, and he's your best guy, and that's really one of your best chances to do anything to get in the playoffs. So some sort of revenge, in my opinion, has to be exacted there. I didn't like the target as Perfetti. Young player in the league. You're still thinking about what's going to happen moving forward, having respect for your fellow player. Yeah, I understand that. But you got Scheifele there. You got Ehlers there. You have star players who've been around the league a little longer. Gabe Vilardi. I just didn't like that it was a younger guy who's had concussion issues in the past. So for me, the target I thought could have been a little bit different there. It could have been go after my star player, go after Ehlers, go after Scheifele, go after Morrissey. There were other options there. I didn't like the option of going after Perfetti, but I do understand when you're that kind of dog on a bone type A personality, send a message. You and I talking today made a little bit more sense for Perfetti. I didn't like it. I would have liked to have seen one of the other guys.
So he uses the word revenge multiple times. Excuse me. A trigger word, right? That's probably not how he was trying to express himself, but he did. He threw out that word, which, like, when you first hear it, revenge, ooh, it's kind of like, is that what you really meant to say? Or was it the word choice? Is that going to cause somebody to hear that word and maybe miss what the point you were trying to make? So I think he was a little a little off on trying to articulate what he meant. And I think he was trying to say, I get your point, Jamal, but I would have done it a different way. I think there was something needed to happen. However, maybe not to this extent. And why, Perfetti, why was he selected? So I don't think he articulated it well. Again, he probably needed a good hour on a podcast to really articulate. And maybe he does better, maybe he doesn't. But, man, he just served himself up for a big comeback here. And the next you're going to hear is Jennifer Botterill. And she obviously has a different approach on this, a different take on it. Let's hear what she says.
You guys are talking about both of the terms you guys use, revenge and sending a message. I don't know. You watch the play, you see Perfetti, a young, great player in your league. You think that's what you want to present or succumb your young, talented players to? That it's okay if I'm this far from Carolyn to two-hander as hard as I can in a 1-foot radius? I don't know. I don't think that's what's selling your game for your biggest stars, your skilled players. You're saying, okay, if you're a young player coming up, be ready because this could happen to you at any point.
Yeah, it could. And at the end of the day...
And you're okay with that. If it's your son out there playing and he takes that two-hand to the face, you know what? It was a good message to send.
But
Would you feel the same?
Okay. So, Jennifer Botterill's reaction is the complete opposite of what we heard from Jamal Mayers. And I don't know what kind of response Sam Cosentino was trying to provide because he butchered it. And is anybody shocked? Because it's a natural reaction. If you look at I stress you go look at the footage of the face-off attempt and see the actual impact to the face, which is very dangerous. Don't get me wrong. So the reaction by anybody with that opinion is not abnormal. There's going to be two sides to this. And again, this is a longer conversation to understand what Jamal Mayers' point is, because I think that needs to be expressed and articulated over a lengthy period of time. The initial reaction when you look at it, the body of work of that footage and the slash and the intent and the reasoning is absolutely a justified opposite reaction and an opposition to that opinion. And she expresses it, which is fine because she also has a lengthy experience in locker rooms and tough situations, a pressure cooker Olympic gold medals, matches against the U.S., pressure, and she's taking a different stance on it, which is absolutely fine. The fact, though, about the son comment, like if it was your son, I don't know if that makes sense. They're talking about the NHL. That's professional, paid athletes compared to if the reference was to your kids playing junior hockey or, midget hockey. I mean, I used to play softball, but, in my it's different than the major leagues. If there's a bench clearing brawl situation in the MLB, I might think that's more justified versus a softball game, a co-ed softball game where I'm leaving the bench to fight some guy and I got to go to work the next day. I don't think that's a comparable position to bring up. So I think that's kind of unfair to have Jamal Mayers, respond to that, because I don't think it's in the same ballpark as the example of what we're looking at of what happened in an NHL matchup. But her point about, are you guys nuts? You're using the word revenge and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that makes sense. Why? That kind of sounds like crazy that you're using those words and basically you're not articulating your point very well. So that I get that point. So I'm going to talk about the selling of the game later. But again, great discussion. Great that two people have two different points and they're going at it and trying to make their positions clear. So this is exactly what Sportsnet has never had. So far, this is fantastic.
If it's your son who took the cross-check,
then he's gonna understand that you have to then go do something and make amends. Either handle it yourself. This isn't archaic.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is archaic.
No, it's not. Because at the end of the day, if these two teams face each other in the playoffs, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think Hartman has now Perfetti in his back pocket because now he knows he's afraid, he's scared, he's unsure?
That's my concern, though, is now what does this mean because Cole Perfetti's spoken about it publicly?
That's the only reason why we're talking about it.
I know, but then that almost unfairly makes the target on Perfetti's back now for the future.
Not necessarily. I think at the end of the day, the game always regresses, in my opinion, 5 years when you head into the playoffs. So when we head into the playoffs, there is an element of meanness. There is an element of not being nice out there. And if you don't like that part of the hockey, then maybe you don't like playoff hockey.
But there's a difference between tough and physical and cheap and dirty. And to me, on a face-off like that, that's cheap and dirty.
Okay, what about the cross-check on our best player? Kaprizov got cross-checked 3 times.
He did.
The last time was the one that injured.
You're against the boards, and it's a fine line between the controlling at the hips. It's a physical game. You're saying it's strong and physical. You've got to penalize your players then before these other. We don't even get to the chance to show the other player. The other player
I disagree. I think Dylan cross-checked him, didn't get him where he wanted. We all know We all know the first one didn't get him where he wanted. The second one gets him right above the hockey pants and below the where your shoulder pads are.
But it's
He
on
knew
the
exactly
pants,
what he was
too.
doing.
It's not
That's
in
a
the
best,
face.
but if that same
99%.
cross-check goes to Scheifele or goes to Morrissey, I'm not saying that a high stick to the face of Perfetti. I didn't like that. I'm saying the target should a little bit different, and if you're going to exact any sort of revenge, let it be the same revenge.
I like the dressing room.
All right, so that was the interaction between the panelists, and I thought, wow, interesting. finally, something beyond the game, the actual watching of the game on Sportsnet was worth taking the time to view, to have an actual thought and opinion about what's going on. So my thought and opinion about what we heard here in the incident was, and I'm going to take a step back. The NHL, if you're not familiar with, obviously is a physical sport. Body checking, physical contact, fighting, which is penalized. So it's not legal technically, but you're not kicked out of the game for the most part for getting in a fight. There's situations where you would, depending on how many fights and whatever. The game has evolved from the earlier years where, the 60s and 70s and 80s where there were absolute shit shows of line brawls on a consistent basis. So this game has always been played with an edge. This game has always been played and successful building fan bases, and this is important, the closer the game is played to the edge. Now, you could say, and I will say, that when I first started watching hockey in the 80s, witnessing consistent fights and brawls, I didn't think much of it when I watched it. It was entertainment. But when you look back, okay, that's getting ridiculously out of hand. That the fighting and the line brawls and the violence was outweighing the product on the ice, the actual skill level, when you really look back at it. A lot of people were in the game that didn't have the skill set to play the game, but they could drop the gloves. It got stupid. When you really look back at it, the childhood memories of what you're watching, it got stupid. Then there was that line, that edge, that many times it went past. Okay? But the game flourishes when it's played as close to the edge, or aka close to the line, as possible. Now you're going to say, what if this happens and this happens? Well, we've had incidents many times, and you can name them. Todd Bertuzzi hitting Moore, Trevor Moore in the back of the head as a revenge, quote unquote, for a hit on Marcus Naslund in a previous game, and this is back years ago when the Vancouver Canucks took on the Avalanche. It's the Avalanche, right? Oh my God, I'm losing my memory here. And it went too far because it broke bones in the guy's neck, and it ruined his career, and there was a lawsuit. So yeah, that's where it crossed the line, and it went too far. And that's the risk of what getting close to the line is. And so, well, let's talk about the NHL and the popularity and the hardcore fans. The fans that have sat through years with their teams, buying the product, going to the games, actually caring who the team drafts, who they trade, who they sign, comes along with a passion that their team looks at the players on their team, the organization, look at the city that they play in, the jersey that those fans wear, and the fans expect that the team cares for the crest on their jersey. They expect to take things personally as they would and as they do as fans, and that they play to the edge. And if you think that part of the NHL allure is not some sort of violence or the potential of an amount of violence as part of the enjoyment of the game and people being hardcore, you're delusional. You are delusional. The same people, do you think that, I don't know what you think, who's not liking the potential for things to go chaotic? But even at junior hockey games, I've witnessed and talked to people that whether it be male or female, and a lot of female, I'm just throwing that out there, that part of the entertainment factor that I've heard is the conflict on the ice. That's an entertainment value. And I only throw that out there to make sure that it's not think, oh, that's the guy mentality. It's not. It's the guy-girl mentality of the NHL fan or the hockey fan. It's an equal desire to see things go a little chaotic. That's my point I'm trying to make. So when I see the reaction, I'll go back to Jennifer Botterill and Jamal Mayers, but when I see the reaction on Twitter that there's one side that just has this hate on for what the NHL really is, and its controlled chaos, and a passion for, the getting to the line with the risk of probably going over it many times, but for the majority part, getting to that line. And I don't understand it because it is part of the core to where the hardcore fan loves the sport and why it's successful. And it has been taken out of the game a lot, and justifiably so. It's been reduced from decades ago. But there seems to be an audience out there, whether it be certain sports writers, whether it be certain fans, that almost want to take it completely out of the game, where it becomes an activity instead of an edgy sport. And that's what will happen if you eliminate it and go swing it too far. The NFL, you could argue, has swung everything toward the quarterback and offense, and it's been successful, but they still know they can't take it too far because there has to be a semblance of organized chaos and physical play and danger to appeal to the hardcore fan. They cannot go too far on limiting the hits and the physical contact in the game. If they go too far, that's when you get the jump the shark, where you've now ruined it. But they're on the edge and they're successful. But there are people out there in the NHL that don't understand that the NHL's model and success works the same way. And they are looking to eliminate anything or be naive to what the current game is and why it is successful and what actual people like, and admit to yourself there's an audience out there that likes it, and it's a large one. It's not a niche one. And if you think that rivalries in anticipation for a potential explosion in the next Winnipeg Jets game versus the Minnesota Wild is more than this so-called, you're promoting the game and this or that, you're naive. You're naive. You're very naive. Now, when it comes back to the discussion between Jamal Mayers and Jennifer Botterill, it was a good one, right? You have one person, and Jennifer Botterill, who is, look, that line's been crossed. In my opinion, what I seen right there, the line is crossed, and that's okay. And there's many people that have that opinion, hardcore fans, people just looking, valid point, justified point. But there's nothing wrong with somebody else also looking at it from a different perspective, from a 13-year NHL career, that may think that there is a positive outcome for your team and how you react to that incident, whether it be the next game or a later game. You may not like how the reaction is. You may think it's archaic, but there is folks that believe that. And like I said, you play the game to the line, and there has to be passion showed, like it or not, and maybe the way it's shown, you don't like it. But that's the reality, okay? So great debate between two veteran hockey players that have way different perspectives on what took place between the Jets and the Wild. Sam Cosentino, I think, was a little lost in that conversation. Maybe should have just hit the mute button before and let those, the two folks there talk it out. And it's okay that, and I'm going to go to the Twitter reaction right now. You still see reaction, like almost like people were predetermined to hate Jennifer Botterill and then layered on, I think she's wrong, and then throw in a comment that how she's a female broadcaster and I don't like her. And I don't even want to read some of the tweets that come out that reference her as a woman versus debating her opinion. I don't understand why it has to go there. It has nothing to do with that. You either agree with her opinion and will choose to rebut it, or you don't, or you agree with it, right? There's nothing wrong with her position. I take it more in the middle and a little more sway to it's part of the game, like it or not, and it could go over the edge sometimes where it doesn't go well, but that's my opinion. And Jamal Mayers, I think he needed a longer time to articulate fully, breaking down what his intention was by expressing that this is okay in the game, which I think I get from that quick segment. I kind of understand where he's trying to navigate his opinion to. But I mean, if you just look at it from the surface and how it was made, the impression could be that, no, it's archaic. And there's many people as well who didn't even take the time to know his name or why he's on the panel because he played in the NHL. So there was both people on equal sides at ripping Jennifer Botterill and Jamal Mayers that had comments that seemed like they were agendas that had nothing to do with actually formulating a thought to why you disagreed or agreed with their opinion. So kudos for a segment on Sportsnet that was actually viewable and interesting and spurn discussion. But a lot to unpack there. Interesting. And I wanted to play that for you. Now, I've killed 40 minutes of the podcast going into this, but I thought it was very interesting to go through. I hope you did too. So we'll move up and we will quickly go through what you came for most likely, and that is the NFL Week 18, our props, and then hang in there for our outlook on the national title game this Monday for the NCAA football final. All right, 7 picks for you, and we're going to start on Saturday. Pittsburgh Steelers need to win and get help to get into the playoffs. The Baltimore Ravens, as the week's gone on, have decided to sit Lamar Jackson and a few other folks. So this really plays into two of my plays here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. One, Mason Rudolph. His yards to pass are 195.5, minus 114. Last week, he threw for 274 in Seattle. And then the week previous against Cincinnati, he threw for 290. Now, I know the Mason Rudolph train is going to end. It's going to end. And I thought if you listen to Tuesday's podcast, I think the Ravens would keep this close. Am I as confident now to know that the number of starters the Ravens are going to keep out? Maybe not, but I still think the guys that are going to be in there for the Ravens are not going to mail this in. They're going to show up. But I think the line, Mason Rudolph's passing yard line, it's got kind of like the Jake Browning effect, where he came in, was throwing 300 yards plus, and his line each week for the most part was too low until it hit a wall against the Kansas City Chiefs last week where he started off strong and just faded. Mason Rudolph's going to face that. It's going to happen. But it may not be this week when I look at a 195.5, line. And on the defensive side, it looks like Marlon Humphrey's not going to play. Kyle Hamilton, very impactful. And if you watched against the 49ers, safety for the Ravens is questionable. And I doubt with a knee injury, he's going to be blitzing and trying to tackle Najee Harris. I can't see him being physical or even playing many snaps, if any snaps at all. So this goes in favor of what I'm looking at when it comes to Mason Rudolph's passing yards to at least hit 200. But one value play here I see is Najee Harris, who in the last 2 games has been a big focal point for the Steeler offense. Many touches compared to previous weeks. He had 27 carries against Seattle for over 100 plus yards. But I like him to score at least at any time touchdown. He's had 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. He's a go-to in the red zone. So I think there's good value there at plus 155 for Najee Harris, running back. Pittsburgh Steelers to score a touchdown anytime. All right. We also have Houston, Indianapolis, Saturday night. Winner gets into the playoffs. Winner also may be the AFC South champion. So big game. And I have decided to back our boy CJ Stroud, the real first overall pick who was picked at number 2. He had a solid week against the Texans. He didn't light it up. Didn't need to. But I think in prime time, when the back's against the wall, he's going to have a big game or he's going to go down swinging if the Houston Texans don't win. I talked about on Tuesday, DeMarco Murray, the coach of the Houston Texans, is going to take care of the defensive game plan, and he's going to leave it in his superstar quarterback's hands to put some points on the board, Indianapolis. I'm taking the CJ Stroud passing yards over 263.5, minus 114. Also, CJ Stroud over 1.5 passing touchdowns, plus 102. Now, he's been up and down. He's had struggled a little bit before the concussion. And even that game in New York against the Jets during that bad weather where he got the concussion. But I think he's going to have a monster game and he's going to be on prime time. So watch out, CJ Stroud. Another one to watch out for, which is interesting in my thought process here, is that the Chicago Bears take on the Green Bay Packers. And the Green Bay Packers are desperate because they need to get into the playoffs with this victory. Really thought they were in a couple weeks ago, pissed away their opportunity, and now they're back. They're 1 win away from getting into the playoffs, and they take on a dangerous Chicago Bears team. Already have the number 1 pick based on the Carolina Panthers giving up their pick to the Bears for Bryce Young to move up in the draft last year. So the Bears are looking to win this game. Motivation, Justin Fields. So the debate's going to be, as soon as the season is over in Chicago, what do the Bears do with Justin Fields? Do they offer him his 5th year or decline to pick up the 5th year of his rookie contract and decide they're going to draft Caleb Williamson first overall? By the way, if you've seen, there's a tweet out there, which is pretty funny, is that Caleb Williamson there was a tweet from, the USC Trojan, looked like social media account, looking at Caleb Williamson's penthouse, giant penthouse, right? Because he's got his NIL money. And Reggie Bush responds and tweets and goes, they took away my Heisman because I accepted a car and $1,000. Give me my Heisman back. How does that look? Like NCAA, do the right thing, give Reggie Bush his Heisman Trophy back. But anyway, Caleb Williamson, thought to be the next phenom quarterback coming into the NFL. What do the Bears do? Well, I'm going to tell you what Justin Fields is going to do. Justin Fields knows that his resume and his last hurrah, his last performance before either the Bears make a decision and or teams come knocking at the door for next year to pick them up. And with the NFL being such a week-to-week league, the last performance is going to be so important. Forget the body of work of what occurred during the season. Some good, some bad, some great. It's going to be about, if he walks into Green Bay, he is going to, and knocks off the Packers in spectacular fashion. I think he's going to, that's the motivation here for him. And I think the motivation for both the organization and Justin Fields is to show that he can win it with his arm and not only his legs. So when I see an over-under of 203.5 passing yards for Justin Fields with something to prove, whether it be to remain with the Bears or have teams line up to pick up Justin Fields, and that's motivation for the Bears as well, he is going to put the ball in the air, and I think 203.5 is way too low. I know Jair Alexander's back, but the Green Bay secondary is also still banged up. So take it over. So we're going with quarterbacks. A lot of quarterback play. Sam Howell, absolute trash the last few weeks. Ever since after Thanksgiving and that loss to Dallas, he's basically been on the decline. And, a Jacoby Brissett injury away from losing the starting job last week and weeks previous where Brissett had to come in and mop up and do better. He's going to get another shot against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Washington Commanders currently own the number 2 pick, so they do not help themselves in any way by winning this game. But let's look at this situation. Again, Sam Howell. He is not going to be the Washington starting quarterback, or at least the first choice starting quarterback going into next year. And Ron Rivera, head coach of the Commanders, will not be around. He's not going to be around. Let's face it, he's done. So his motivation is not, I don't think, loyalty to the organization to kind of take the foot off the gas against the Cowboys. And I do think the Cowboys are frauds, by the way, and they will struggle on the road in Washington in a divisional matchup where this is basically Sam Howell, Ron Rivera, and the Washington Commanders Super Bowl this year. This is their game. And it should be the Cowboys game because they have the driver's seat to win the NFC East. But they'll choke some way, somehow. But so Sam Howell, even though he's only reached 200 yards ever since the Thanksgiving game against Dallas where he threw for 300 in a losing situation, I'm going to take Sammy Howell, 215.5. Shout out Austin Ajax, Sam Howell. Now, I said quarterbacks. We're going to get my last play. I can't end a season without going back to our boy Tyreek Hill. He's on fire. No, that's his house. Apparently, if you hear the story that somebody was in the house, the child was playing with a lighter. Thank God nobody was hurt, obviously. So that's why I'm joking about it. But his house went up in flames. Not a good situation. But when the Dolphins need a win to win this division against Buffalo, I got to believe it's Tyreek Hill time. Like, he had 99 yards against the Dallas Cowboys on limited possessions. He was kind of put to the back burner against the Ravens, only 70-plus yards. But who do you go to when you need a win? Tyreek Hill. 91.5 receiving yards. We're going to hope that Tua's shoulder is good enough to pump those passes over to Tyreek Hill. But if I'm McDaniels, I'm letting the leash off. We live or die on the shoulders of Tua to Hill. Scatter in Jalen Waddle. But Tua to Hill. You want to win that game, you put the ball in probably top 3 choice for MVP in the NFL. And he's not a quarterback. That tells you how impactful he is. Make an impact on Sunday. Get the ball in his hands. Tyreek Hill over 91.5 yards. That's it for NFL prop action. Hope you liked it. But to leave you to quickly talk about the NCAA final, Monday night, and hope you got to watch the Rose Bowl where Michigan and Alabama kind of like had a slug out match. Like they went to overtime. Michigan probably should have buried Alabama early. A lot of piss poor coaching, surprisingly, from Nick Saban on the offense. Late in that second half, forced a 20-20 tie going to overtime, and the Wolverines pulled it out. And maybe they were the better team, maybe they weren't. But they go against a Washington team that really came down to the wire against Texas when it shouldn't. They should have managed the clock much better. So they won a close matchup, but should have handled that with 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. But they did do it. And man, this kid, quarterback for Washington, the Huskies, Penix, watch him throw a football. He's got a rifle. You want to call it a howitzer, you want to call it a rifle, laser. He's got a good arm, man. He's got a good arm and enjoyable to watch. And this Washington team has been underdogs all year for the most part. Underdogs against Texas. I like Washington to cover the 4.5. When you got a quarterback like that, I'll take my chances. Michigan, I think, is up and down in big games. I mean, they just squeaked by Alabama. It wasn't a fine performance. It got the job done. But give me 4.5, and I'm also going to sprinkle the plus 160 Washington money line. There's a chance they could win this game. Why not? I think Michigan is the popular choice and maybe overvalued in this game. Here's an interesting prop. Each team to score one passing touchdown and one rushing touchdown, which was plus money. I didn't write it down. Damn it. Plus money. So that's each team to score one passing touchdown and one rushing touchdown. Now, if the game goes as the Washington game went with Texas, these teams will march down the field scoring a lot of points. And I'm hoping it's not going to be like the Alabama-Michigan game where a lot of drives stalled out with missed field goals, etc. That's called a gamble. That's what I'm doing. And two last ones here. Actually, yeah, Michael Penix. I think he's going to put up some yards. It's high, 292.5, and he did throw for over 400 against Texas. And it's not Texas. Michigan's obviously got one of the top Ds in the college football. But I'm gonna put my hopes and dreams on this quarterback to go over 292.5 passing yards minus 114. And last but not least, you have McCarthy, quarterback for the Michigan Wolverines. J.J. McCarthy, also expected to potentially be an early round pick in the NFL draft coming up. He's going to get the job done with his legs, okay? He rushed for 25 yards, yes, but he's had games where 40, 50 yards. Quinn Ewers of the Texas Longhorns rushed for over 50 yards against the Washington defense, and that was the highest he's had for the number of games. So I got to believe that the game plan for Michigan is to put the ball in McCarthy's hands, but for him to take off out of the pocket and get those key first downs that they need and make it a part of the game plan, and not just because the three options he was looking for were not there. Set plays, make him use his feet, use that weapon, and maybe Michigan will be successful. Well, there you have it. We talked about a walkthrough on an NHL situation. Talked about NFL props, Week 18. And keep in mind as well, and I didn't have the information to go by here, but many times you hear stories of guys in the NFL and their bonuses and, passing or receptions and touchdowns. And they're, we're coming up to the end of the season, and a lot of these guys are on the brink of a touchdown or a brink of 20 yards receiving. And quarterbacks know this, and they're forcing plays to these receivers and or running backs or tight ends or whatever it may be, so these guys can hit their bonuses. So if you have any inside track on what those might be, keep that in mind as you're navigating the props list going into Sunday. So that being said, the Overrated Experience is basically been a pleasure tonight. Pleasure's been all yours. And we are going to be over and out. Enjoy the action, everybody. Bye-bye.